let's go ahead and get started. The first thing that I like to do is find the dates for the number of weeks that equal the number of zones I have. So in this case, I know I have 3 zones, so I'm going to look at the first week, second week, and third week, and I'm going to use those dates to load my zones up. So for my Zone 1 facilities, I'm going to give them all, regardless of facility, the date of the 29th of December in 2014. I'll move to the PMTL Assignments tab. I'll scroll to the right where we see the last annual PM date. I'm going to filter for my Zone 1. The first date that I'm going to put in is 12/29/2014. I'm going to copy that date. I'm going to select everything in the table, and because I filtered for Zone 1, it's going to represent only Zone 1 assets. And then I'm going to click on Paste Values. Now remember that I said this document is doing a lot of calculations. Because of that, not everything is going to take at once. In order to make it more efficient to work with the tool, I had to tell it to not calculate. What that means is when we go back to the chart, you'll see that there's no data here. The way we get it to calculate again is to do a recalculate after we change the date information. And at this point, it happens fairly quickly. So you can see that we now have data on the chart that represents the number of hours for our Zone 1 assets. And I'm going to do the same thing for Zone 2 and Zone 3. So Zone 2 is the 5th of January 2015. I'll go back to the PMTL Assignments tab, select Zone 2, move to the top, type in the date 1/5/2015. I'm going to copy that date. Now I could draw down just like I did last time, but because of the feature of this table, I can move my mouse up and select everything in that column to make it more efficient. So now that I've selected everything in this table that represents Zone 2, I'm going to click Paste Values. I'll go back and get the third week's of dates, the 12th of January, filter for Zone 3, make sure that I'm at the top of the document and type in 1/12/2015, copy the date, select the whole tables column, and click Paste Values. When I move back to the charts on the Analysis Tools tab, I'll click Recalculate, and you'll now be able to see that I've done an initial load on all of my assets for my HVAC shop. Please note that in the second graph, the one that represents zones, you see that there are solid colors representing each week. That's because we set all of our Zone 1 assets to the first week, and all of our Zone 2 assets to the second week, and Zone 3 to the third. Also important to note is even though we separated these by weeks, we still get some unintended consequences throughout the year. The reason for this is that a month is not exactly 4 weeks. So when you have monthly requirements, they may occur at odd intervals. We can compensate for this by moving the dates forward and back by less than a week. We can move them forward and back by 1 day or 2 days or 4 days. But for right now, we'll leave it as is and say, look, our data is present. But this is probably a good time to emphasize that what we're trying to achieve with this balancing is an 80 to 90% solution, something that we've never had before. We don't need to make it perfect. And in fact, many times making adjustments within the data will cause other things to happen that will make it worse. So for now, I'm going to leave it as is and say, I think it'll work out in the end, but let's see. So moving on to the next stage of this initial distribution, my goal is to take these peaks and evenly distribute them throughout the year. In order to do this, I'm going to use one of the calculators on the left side of the screen. But all that I'm doing is taking the peaks, dividing it up into 12 chunks, and distributing those 12 chunks across the whole year. The way that we do that is through the initial distribution calculator. This calculator needs to know what peak are you trying to divide out and what peak is representative of an average distribution. So what I'm going to feed it right now is the first peak, which is the 29th of December. And then I'm going to tell it the first time that zone 1 appears 1 month later, which is the 26th of January. I need to make sure that it's zone 1 because those are the numbers that it's using, and I'm telling it that I want 12 even divisions. So when I click recalculate, it says that the average amount that I need to move is 114 hours. So in order to do this, I need to make sure that I remember the 26th of January is the first date I want to move out to. Again, this part becomes much easier when you have a full 2-screen setup, because then you're not having to jump back and forth. What I'm going to do is use a list that I've written down for the dates as a cheat sheet so that I don't have to jump back and forth for training. And so in order to get started, I'll go back to the PMTL Assignments tab. I'll make sure that I've filtered for Zone 1. And then I have to select the number of assets that represents about 114 hours. In order to help me see this, we have added the sum column that does a cumulative total. So when I recalculate after having selected the zone, it will show me all of the values as they increased from the annual hours that are listed. That means that as I scroll down, I see that 114 turns out to be somewhere in between the first asset and the second asset in building 7179. One of the key things to this process is that we don't want to split buildings. We want to keep buildings on the same day. So what we'll do is select somewhere close. Since this is after the holiday season, I'm going to go a little bit less than 114 hours. Make sure that we move smoothly into the new year. So I'm going to take the first date. I'm going to change it to the 26th of January. I will then copy that date and select down to about 114 hours and paste the values. Now normally I would keep going for the full year and not take a break. But for the purposes of training, I'd like you to see what's happening. When I go back to the Analysis Tools tab, watch what happens to this Zone 1 column when I recalculate. You should see a chunk, about 114 hours, move off of it to this first month. But what's more, you'll see some other things happen, and that's because we're not just shifting 1 month. We're shifting all of the cyclic frequencies with that month. So we see some additional changes occur throughout the year. As predicted, we could see that change in Zone 1. It dropped, and this second month of Zone 1 increased. If we move up to the frequency chart, you can see exactly what happened. We took 106.75 hours from Zone 1 in the first week, and moved them out as annual hours to the first month. You can see how each of the quarterly, semi-annual, and quarterly again shifted throughout the year. So I'm going to continue with that process, and hopefully you'll be able to see that it actually goes fairly quickly. I select the next date, set it to March of 2015. The 2nd of March is the date that I had chosen. When it updates, I'm going to go ahead and copy that cell, move on down to about 114 hours. In this case, during March, there's not much need for some holidays, so I'm going to increase it to 128 and capture 5385. I'll paste values. I'm going to move straight into the next one and go to the 30th of March, 2015. Copy that, move it down to 114 or so. I could probably go another 128. We've got some holidays, but this seems like it's a reasonable time frame. I'll paste values on that. I'll go to the next one, which happens to be the 27th of April. And I think you can see that this process is very step by step. And that's one of the nice things about it. We have the ability to kind of go through the same things over and over again. And because of that, it becomes very easy to learn in a short amount of time. The key thing is redundancy and iterative processes. Redundancy is going to help ingrain and learn, and you'll get much more efficient. Of course, there's always the possibility of making a mistake there. I didn't select the cell and copy it before I went down to paste the new values, but I'm going to continue on with the process I was accomplishing before. I'm going to take this opportunity to describe the relationship that we envision between R&O and the shops in developing a balanced PM schedule. We do not recommend that the shops be told to go use this program. Far too many people would have to be trained on it, and they wouldn't use it frequently enough to become proficient at it. Instead, we recommend that you identify that point person, that Excel guru, that person that's comfortable in Excel, and particularly that person that's comfortable with puzzles. And you have that individual work with the shops to develop a schedule. For the first shop or the second shop, it may take a long time because that person isn't familiar with the seasonal requirements. But by the time that individual gets to the third, fourth, or fifth shop, they're going to be able to work within the system so much more quickly than anybody new to the document would. In this way, we feel that you'll be able to minimize the number of errors because they're familiar with the tool, and also maximize the efficiency because they'll have done it several times before. What's more, when it's time for annual review of PM schedules, that person will be your go-to for training others within the R&O section. After somebody's familiar working with the tool, they should be able to create a balanced schedule within a day or two, if not multiple schedules within a single day. Alright, so now I've completed getting all of the dates set up. You see that the last chunk here is the first chunk that was left, and that's important to do it that way. It really does make sure that even though it's out of order, logically speaking, it's still in order calculated by calculation. So if I go back to the Analysis Tools tab, clearly nothing has changed right off the bat, but I'm going to recalculate. And when I do, you'll see this first peak shift all the way throughout the year. And we have a nice even balance for Zone 1 throughout the entire 12-month period. So at this point, I would do the same thing for Zones 2 and 3, but like a Rachael Ray cooking show, I've had the quiche in the oven for the last hour or two. So what I'm going to do is take a moment for all our questions and comments. Please make sure that you're updating that chat box, and then we'll come back to it, and you'll see what this looks like after all three zones have been distributed evenly.